One of the things that is commonly misunderstood about the account of the fall, which is a misunderstanding that goes back to Milton and his book Paradise Lost, is the idea that somehow Eve was by herself when Satan tempted her. And that's not actually true. It says very clearly in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, that she gave the fruit to Adam who was with her, and he ate. So he's sitting there the whole time watching while Satan tempts Eve, and he does nothing to stop it or prevent it. A second misconception is that there's this apple, that the apple is the fruit. That also comes from Milton. He does a pun on the words evil and apple. One of them is malum, and the other is malus. But we don't actually know what the fruit was. The only actual fruit mentioned in Genesis 3 is the fig tree from which they get the leaves to cover themselves. What is the tree then of the knowledge of good and evil? That's received many different interpretations throughout history, and I'm simply going to lay out before you what I think it meant. But know that there are other interpretations. The knowledge of good and evil is, I believe, the determination of what is good and evil. So the lure of the tree that Satan dangles in front of Adam and Eve is to throw off God's law and become a law unto themselves, what we call autonomy, throwing off theonomy or God rule, God's law. The fall into sin was not Adam and Eve becoming more aware or more experienced or more like God. They became less like God. The image of God became tarnished and stained. We'll look at chapter 3, verse 22 and its proper translation in an upcoming video. But what they became aware of when they ate the forbidden fruit was their own shame. They had no shame when they had no sin. When they were obedient, they had no shame. But shame came into being with disobedience. And they instinctively knew that they had to cover themselves. They did not want to be open to God's gaze anymore. And of course, as humans have always done throughout history, they cover themselves in a very inadequate way. Just like fig leaves are flimsy excuses, so also they throw up other flimsy excuses towards God, trying to blame someone else for the things that they themselves did. Adam, when he's asked by God, "What did you do? Why'd you do this?" he blames both God and Eve. Eve, in turn, when she's asked by God, "What is this you've done?" she blames the serpent. But I want you to notice that God's reaction to Adam and Eve has both justice and mercy. He could have simply annihilated them and started over, but he did not do that. Now you'll notice that God does not ask the serpent any questions. God proceeds straight to judgment. Now Genesis 3:15 is one of the most important verses in the entire Bible, as Christians have noted throughout history. As I've already hinted at in the last video, there was before this a new agreement that Satan contracted with Adam and Eve. And so the enmity that God talks about in the first part of chapter 3, verse 15, implies a breaking of that relationship between Satan and humanity and the reestablishing of a relationship by agreement or covenant between God and humans. So that's one of the reasons why this verse is called the first gospel, the first good news, or in Greek, proto-evangelion. There would be a seed of the woman who would crush the head of the serpent, even while getting his heel crushed by the serpent. And this is the first hint of what Jesus Christ would come to do. So part of the good news then is the destruction of the single greatest enemy of humanity, namely Satan himself.